So we're just giving it a few minutes to let everybody join this webinar today. I can see lots of people joining. Very pleased to see you all here. So welcome to this first in the series of 3 webinars that we're doing in conjunction with NPL, the National Physical Laboratory. This one is about the digital future for Britain. So just before we get started, I'll just give you a little bit of background if you're not familiar with the Chartered Institute of Information Security. So we help individuals and organisations develop their capabilities and competencies. And we have a host of activities, events, courses, etc., that run throughout the year to help people with that. So this is just gives you an idea. We've got live events, which obviously, unfortunately, haven't happened this year, but next year will be in Edinburgh in September. We have events specifically for members, our masterclass events, CCP and ADP events, and we have regional events as well, and career development. We have a magazine, and all of our membership and us, we're here to sort of shape the profession and help bring up the standards of information security, including there's an entry exam as well as the official starting point. So if you're in this industry and you're not already a member, then we highly recommend that you pop over to our website and read a bit more and then, become a member. So just some rules about the webinar today. Obviously, as attendees, you'll be muted, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions. We've got a Q&A box which you can use. Just pop your questions in there at any time and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. And if you do have any problems, either put a question in there or put a question in the chat, or you can also email support@ciisec.org. Okay, so we have today hosting the webinar, we have Kevin Streeter, so I'll hand over to him and his very capable hands to introduce the next section. Thanks, Kevin.
Great. Thank you very much, Shona, and good afternoon, everybody. My name's Kevin Streeter, member of Chartered Institute and Vice President at ForgeRock, who is an organisation that specialises in digital identity. And I'm delighted to be introducing this series of webinars with NPL. NPL to me is one of those hidden secrets of the UK PLC. It's maybe thought of as the place that does measurement, that does time, but actually so much of the work that NPL does in science and engineering and research supports everything that we do in the industry. And I have to actually thank my career in cybersecurity entirely down to National Physical Laboratory. As a poor student some 30 years ago, I was actually sponsored through university by National Physical Laboratory, working on secure digital tokens. And I'm still in the industry, still working in cybersecurity, and all down to some of the great work that NPL led and has continued leading, supporting industry, and very much a hidden gem of the UK technology world. So with that, I'd like to welcome Professor Neil Stansfield. Neil is the head of strategy at NPL, and lots of really interesting projects going on at NPL, very diverse range of things. But Neil, fantastic to have you here today, and thank you for joining us, and really thank you for engaging with CIISec across a whole series of webinars that we're going to be doing. But Neil heads up sort of the direction with strategy, and Neil, I'd like to just introduce you and say thank you for joining us, and looking forward to your talk about digital future for Britain.
Kevin, thank you. I'm hoping you can all see my slides.
Yep.
It's a real pleasure and actually a privilege to be talking to this audience today. I guess before I start, I'd pose to you the question, if we were in the sort of lockdown 2 that we're currently in, how would you have fared 10 years ago? How would your working life, your home life, have been able to go on in the way it is today, if that had happened just 10 years ago? You know, bear in mind that Amazon now stock market value at over $2 trillion didn't exist 20 years ago. And in the geological scale of things, you know, that's just a blink of an eye. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, and it's always difficult because I can't see you, you might be reading a book, you might be asleep. It's always difficult on digital media, but, you know, frankly, this is the way of the future. What I'd like to do over the next 20 minutes or so is to try and paint a picture of where the UK and the world is going in this new digital age. So by way of background, my name's Neil Stansfield. My background is, well, it feels like about 50 years in defence and national security at the strategy and policy level. But I've always had one hand on science and technology. So if I look at my first degree, it was chemistry with mathematics. So I'm a scientist by heart and a scientist by training, and a mathematician at the core of me, even if my last degree was international relations. And my professorships are in data science, and particularly data science for national security, which perhaps rings a bell with you guys. So what I'm going to do is just, if I can, run through a little bit about thinking about where the world is in the digital age, the implications of that digital age, and then, if I may, to be a bit parochial, to just paint you a little bit of a picture, I think, from my perspective, around what measurement means in the digital age. And then I'll return to you guys and girls for questions. So these numbers are up to date. Nearly 60% of us now have digital access, and across the UK that's 96.7%. So I say 96, but call it 97 for my 14-year-old daughter. Smartphones in the world, nearly 3.5 billion, with a world population of just over 6 billion. That's half of us. By 2020, we're predicted to have, through the Internet of Things, over 30 billion interconnected devices. That's 5 each. I don't do this number. When I used to give this talk 5 years ago, I used to talk about 2.5 times 10 to the 18. I hope there's some mathematicians present who understand that number. 2.5 times 10 to the 18 is the sum of human knowledge expressed in bytes from the dawn of time until 1983. It's also 2.5 times 10 to the 18, the sum of the data expressed in 2018. Yeah. The difference is, and I'll come to a quote in a minute, the difference is that from the dawn of time until 2013, it's all about Shakespeare, it's all about Einstein, it's all about Darwin, it's all about Dickens, it's all about moving forward the sum of human knowledge. And in 2018, it's all about my wife's Tesco's bill. It's all about the information that we produce on when do I fill up my car? When does my fridge need restocking? It's a totally different set of data. So the world is moving to a world in which we are completely, I guess, overwhelmed by the amount of data that's there. And the example to me with my national security background is that on D-Day, at the D-Day landings, every commander, every field station had a photograph, a reconnaissance photograph of where he or she was going to go. With diversity, I must admit that at the time it was a majority he, but where they were going to go. when we looked at the first Gulf War, our commanders in the field did not have that information. It wasn't that it wasn't available, it's that there was too much satellite imagery that we couldn't in time distill that to what they needed. So that explosion of information, of data, has probably, and I'll use this word, overwhelmed the majority of us, whether that's from a societal or an economic perspective. So, you know, the transitions from my childhood reading newspapers for my understanding of the world as it was, my reading of books has moved to social media, has moved to online news. The cinema that I used to go to is now Netflix downloaded. And in fact, my children dominate where Netflix takes me. The old telephone booth where I used to put the 5 pence pieces is now my smartphone. And maybe the smartphone is perhaps the exemplar of the digital revolution, because for me, the step change was not when someone said, "Oh, I've got a smartphone." It was when someone looked at a telephone and said, "You know, I've had this for 100 years, and all I've ever done is talk on it." And that was the innovation. There was nothing new technologically in the smartphone that changed the world in which we live. It was just a bringing together of societal, economic, and technological needs into a simple solution that no one knew they wanted or needed until it appeared. Writing letters. How many of you here are furloughed and working from home, and you do everything by email and video conference? Hey, maybe, you know, that's the new norm. My origins, my background, I used to write a letter, I used to send it to the typing pool, they would type it up and it would be transmitted. Now it's all done as we're doing right now. So, you know, that's the future for me. And the underpin for that has to be that the future is digital, the next economy is digital. You can look to the left, some of the numbers: 4.6 billion people online, 3.7 billion people working on social media. There's no doubt whatsoever in my mind, in the minds of many people I speak with, that this revolution is going to shape the future. It was said the 19th century was the century of chemistry, the 20th century, early part, was the century of physics. The later part of the 20th century was the century of biology, and the 21st century is the century of digital. And I think we just all have to get our heads around that and embrace that, because that's the next normal. I mentioned that the next industrial revolution is all about digital. To me, and you may have your own views on this, this is about disruption to current models, not destruction of current models. And let me give you an example that's not digital related, but may put home a point. I did when I was working in national security, the first example of non-petrol driven cars. We did an experiment in Australia, and the people who played with us were perhaps notable not by who was there, but notable by their absence. So there was nobody from BP, there was nobody from Exxon, there was nobody from Texaco. And why weren't they there? Because the future change as we go to digital is about disruption. And there are only two sets of people who care about disruption to me: those who don't want to be disrupted. So in that case, the people like BP or Exxon who have a vested infrastructure, and the people who want to disrupt but not destroy. They want to bring in, they want to herald a new way of doing things. And perhaps, and this is argumentative, but for the first time in 3 generations, this is a step change in the industrial landscape. So that, you know, the slide indicates the sort of volume of opportunity that business is seeing in a multi-trillion-dollar environment as we move to a new digital infrastructure. It's no surprise Google Cloud grew in Q3 of this year by 45%, fastest growing part of Google. And that's the rate of growth that we're seeing in this digital infrastructure. And so what does that lead us to? Well, you know, this talks about it. 33 zettabytes. I talk about 2.5 times to the 18. We're talking exabytes. So again, the mathematicians will tell you we are now 3 orders of magnitude beyond where we were in 2018. That's a 1,000-fold growth. I used to talk about Generation Z, which is not a third degree punk group. That's about Generation Z, those between the age of about 7 to about the age of 21. But we did some work. We did some work with GCHQ where we stopped recruiting graduates because we couldn't hang on to them. And we started recruiting school leavers. And the underlying point that we made was a school leaver probably has 12 years of digital and data expertise behind them. They probably picked up their first computer, tablet, laptop, smartphone, wherever it might be, 12 years before they ended school. And that, you know, that's the world that we're living in. And it's only going to grow exponentially. The latest figures I got from McKinsey estimate that by 2025 will be between 150 and 200 zettabytes of data. So think about that growth, and that has huge implications, not just to me, not just to government, but right across society, right across industry, and everybody is embracing this change. So simple things. Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce used to build engines, and that was their heritage, that was their signature. They were a manufacturing and engineering organization. They're not anymore. They're a digital organization, and they supply everything based on data flow and informatics. So it's all about you rent an engine from us, and we will tell you how it works, when it's working, when it needs repair. It's all about informatics, all the way through to, if you look at the government's top priorities, number one, COVID-19 and our response to COVID-19. And yeah, okay, so I'm a mathematician, as I said, by background with chemistry. You kind of think COVID-19 is about wet chemistry. No, it's not. Tune in to the messages coming from number 10 from the government chief scientific advisor. How many times have you seen information, data, statistics put on those view files? Pretty much every single day. So it's all about the information, the data that's flowing. And we've done some work with the NHS, and they didn't ask us to look at responses to COVID-19. They looked at information flow. So how do we flow information to make the way in which we triage patients more effective, to move from 28 days to 20 days? And it was all about data. It was all about the information flow. Government's second priority, of course, is bringing industry back onto line. And our third priority is net zero. Net zero has nothing to do with digital and data, is it? It's all about gases, and it's all about energy plants. And no, it's not. No, it's not. Everything to do with net zero is all about data flow. It's all about understanding how data is moving through our understanding of climate change, our understanding of energy emissions. It's all about the digital fabric. Every time we make a switch in the energy infrastructure, we lose 20% of energy efficiency. that's all about digital control to maximize the efficiency of the operation. It's not about the energy per se, it's about the way we digitally control that energy infrastructure. So to me, that whole piece, moving from Generation Z or Generation Y or Generation X, where some of us may have come from, into today's and next generation, is all about the implications of data and digital for how we go forward. So for me, there's two ends to this telescope. One is the opportunity, and one is the challenge. There's no doubt in my mind, having spent many years in national security, that emerging technologies present huge opportunities, but they also present big challenges. They present changes to the way in which we live our lives, changes to the way in which we conduct business, changes to the way in which we go about our day-to-day operations. So the difference, I think, is that it used to be, and I'll come back to this theme, it used to be for governments, for big organizations to set the agenda. It's not like that anymore. Digital, as I'll talk in a minute, gives us a reach and a rapidity, a rapid engagement, which means that things that government are thinking that would have taken weeks, months even, to think about, are now happening on a daily or even hourly basis. So emerging technologies, data being the predominant one, but others coming through, are changing not only the way in which we live our lives, but the rate in which we live our lives and the reach within which we consider our lives. Underlying all of that, I think, and I'll open this up for challenging questions, becomes a question of confidence. And I will return to this. And I think it's really important for this audience to understand what confidence means. Because as we move more and more to a society which is underpinned by this digital infrastructure, digital architecture, digital reach, we have to have confidence in what that is telling us. And there's a hanging question. So let me pose for you 5 themes. And I offer these, and I'm not saying they're Welsh, but I'm Welsh. I'll alliterate, as you can see from the wall behind me. I'm passionately Welsh, so I like the alliteration. I'll offer you 5 themes on the digital age. The first is that our reliance on the digital infrastructure has grown, is growing exponentially, and often we don't realize it. So, an aside, in my previous life, I took out a Type 23 destroyer on the English Channel with $100 off-the-shelf GPS jammer. We took out not only one system, which we expected to take out, which was the GPS signal. We took out 23 separate signals on that destroyer. So not only could we disrupt its ability to navigate, its ability to communicate, its ability to interact with the subparts of the ship as it was, 23 separate things. And the most important thing to me was that the captain of the ship didn't know that if we took out GPS, those were the things that he would lose. I can't do a show of hands. Sorry, Kevin. I would normally do this. How many of you realize that if we lost GPS, you couldn't take cash out of a cash point machine? You know, simple point. These are all things that we assume just happen, but actually are reliant on our digital infrastructure. So to make our response robust, we have to have a resilient infrastructure. My little story, I once interviewed somebody for a post as head of science for counterterrorism, and we asked a question of, if you could provide a game-changing technology, what would it be? And we had this chap who came in and said, you know, the ability to understand time and measure time to 10 to the minus 18 of a second. I had a young lady from MI6 on my left and a young man from MI5 on my right. And we all looked at each other and thought, you know what, how boring. And then he said, you know what, sir, if you could measure time that accurately, you could ensure every single stock and share transaction across the globe. And we all thought, oh, wow, what else could we do with that? What else could we do if we had that resilient infrastructure for example, timing? Next one is these things are evolving at pace. My story here is really around the rate of change. I mentioned Google's growth by 45%. I gave a speech at a book ceremony in 2002, and we didn't mention Google, we didn't mention Amazon, we didn't mention Netflix, and we didn't mention Twitter. Yeah, we're only 20 years on, and yet 200 years ago, the revolution was the industrial age first, and it's taken us, what, 200 years to get to the implications of that. And now we're doing it on a decade by decade or even a year by year basis. I suggest to you that this means global reach, and I'll come to this in a bit more detail. But for me, the seminal moment was Arab Spring 2010. Where a fruit seller in Tunis, frustrated by being unable to take his goods to market, through an act of self-immolation, really overthrew or set in place events that overthrew governments that had been in place for decades, if not centuries. That single event had global reach right across the region, but within 2 days, in fact, within 36 hours. In Indonesia, we were seeing posts of that photograph. But global reach, I think, often means geography. So we looked at, you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall and how quickly the news of that spread and the implications of that had ramifications for neighboring areas. It's easy to think about the global reach. I often think about the vertical reach. So for me, information that used to be the province of nation states, of big multinationals, is now at your fingertips, at my fingertips, at my children's fingertips. It's all there. The reach means that I can understand or I can find everything that's out there that people are saying. But with that reach comes something to me is critical. And I don't want to be political about this, but it's about the reliability of that reach. So we know we're reliant on digital technologies. We know that needs a resilient response. We know that that's moving fast and it's outreaching more than we would ever have realized 10 years ago. But how do we trust it? And I use the word confidence. I'll come back to that. I use the word confidence, but that whole infrastructure needs to provide us something that is reliable. And certainly as we move through not the decades, but now the years and perhaps even the months, and we move to a world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, decisions are taken out of our hands and out of human hands. How are we sure? How do we have confidence that those things are the right things? So let me, if I may, just unpack some of those. There's 5 graphics there. All of those indicate areas in which we are absolutely reliant on digital tech, and often we don't realize it. So from manufacturing, Industry 4.0, factories as we're developing them now are fully digital. Your car, your phone as being produced is being produced through digital oversight. When you take you're all members of CIISec, so you're all probably rich and famous. So you all drive Mercedes-Benz with your automatic lane assistance systems, ALAS. and it drives you straight down the middle of the road. And we don't think about it anymore. The iPhone, you know, I said the innovation was when we stopped saying all we ever do is talk on it. Now we rely on that for everything from our finances to our navigation to our communications. It's just all pervasive. British Airways, last piece of work I did on a passenger jet, we had 736,000 different pieces of information that flowed. Yeah, that's the right number. 736,000 pieces of information that flowed to keep that jet in the air. Yeah, and it's national, it's global, it's all pervasive, and often we just take it for granted. So, you know, just thinking about that across the society and the economy, our response to C19, actually, it's all had a digital underpin. You only need to go back, as I said, to the number 10 briefings. Think about our economy. Where is our economy going, and where is the revitalization of the economy? It's all about a digital resurgence. So right across what we're doing, all the way through to net zero, where everything is about, do we understand the metrics? Do we understand the informatics? Do we understand the data flow? Do we understand the sensors that are giving us the information that are driving the strategic and policy decisions as to how we go forward? It's all based on the transformation of a society to a digital backbone. So, okay, we're kind of reliant. Is that infrastructure resilient? Bottom right graphic, if you can see that. This was me on a train platform. Back to the we're reliant on it. I took this on my mobile phone. You might see that the clock reads 08:34. The train I was catching was 06:34, so the clock was wrong. You can't read the detail here when you blow up the slides when they're distributed. You will see that the next train is arriving at 05:22. This was all driven by a failure on a single point, and I mean a point as in a physical point on the rail infrastructure, which sent a false information to the controller, which then went into overload and sent false information to the platform. So we had hundreds, literally hundreds of commuters thinking, hang on, it's only 6:30. Why is it telling me it's 8:34 and my train is arriving an hour ago? So we must have resilience in our infrastructure. I'll come back to time. So that last example talked about time. Time does much more than we realize. Time is the centerpiece to the critical national infrastructure. It's not about defining the second. It's about defining the way in which our communication systems work, in which we run our logistics, in which everything in industry is synchronized. So time is absolutely critical to the UK infrastructure. It's an example for me of a piece of the architecture which must be resilient, upon which we're reliant, but in which we are ignorant. I couldn't make that an R, I'm afraid. But, you know, these are the sort of commodities that underpin the digital infrastructure that make everything that we do work seamlessly, but they have to work whenever we want them. Kevin, I'm going to trust on luck here and see if the graphic works. You know, we're moving to an age of autonomous vehicles or driverless vehicles. Ain't much use if you drive through an area where your system cuts out. Yeah, so resilient, reliant, we depend on that. If we don't have a resilient infrastructure, we're kind of in trouble. For me, and this may accord with this audience, there's three natures in the resilient debate. The first is natural. So GPS, GNSS taken out by space weather, Carrington event 1852, melted telegraph poles, telegraph wires on the surface of the Earth. Imagine the impact of that on today's infrastructure. Natural event. The second, very relevant to you, is the deliberate, whether that's cyber, external, or the insider threat. You may know, and this isn't in the public domain, at least not openly, but a major online retailer had all of their online transactions disrupted through a disgruntled employee who disrupted the AI algorithms for what people would order and what they would get. And so lots of people ordered stuff and got something completely different. Insider threat, someone on the inside of the loop making a change. And then the third to me is the accidental. And this is particularly important as we move to a world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, where we move from the simplistic linear algorithm that we can say, if you put this in, you get this out, to an AI, ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning enabled environment where you put this in and this is what you get out today. But in 5 days, 10 days time, you put this in and you get something different out. And you know, my favorite example, I first did this with the Americans, and we looked at, this was for the Gulf War, we looked at American versus Russian tanks in theater, and could we identify them from image? And we gave it to an AI algorithm, and for all the images that we gave it, it was perfect. And then we gave it real in theater images, and it got everyone wrong. And the reason was that the AI said, if it's an American tank, it's set against a background of yellow, it's sand. And if it's a Russian tank, it's set against a background of brown, it's mud. And so I can make a simple calculation that if it's in brown, it's Russian, and if it's in yellow, it's American. Completely wrong. So we put garbage in, we put the wrong inputs in, the AI took it in the wrong way, and it gave us the wrong interpretation. So understanding the implications of that, I think, is really important. I'm not, Kevin, I am not going to attribute the photo on the left. Some of you may accord with that in your early days. For me, this was perhaps the pinnacle of my career. But, you know, this is what digital used to look like on the left. And yet, look at the numbers on the right. That's the rate of evolution. That's the rate of change. That's the rate in which this technology is developing, engulfing us. And you know what? We're kind of going along with the flow. That's just accepted. How many of us look back to our first word processor, or even when we had to get the typing pool to write our notes or our memos for us, and we used to do our calculations on a handheld calculator with those big push buttons. And now it's all by text. It's all by, hey Alexa, how many people live in the world? How many sheep are in New Zealand? It's just a totally different environment, which is just changing for us literally day by day. The key point, I think, for me is that the rapid advance has the ability to disrupt and also transform our whole way of life. And I put this across from the digital infrastructure, the obvious, through the enabling, what I call the fabric, to what it means for us in our daily lives and what it means for the economy in the vertical sectors. And I think we need to really get our minds around that. I talked about reach. The graphics here are obvious, aren't they? I talked about Arab Spring and its linkage, you know, its uptake in Indonesia. My, well, he's 24, I can't call him really my boy, but, you know, his friends are online and they come from all around the world. In 2007, as my bio shows, I had the privilege of working with people from 43 countries at MOD's most senior leadership program. That to me was global outreach. Today, global outreach is the touch of a button. But as I said earlier, it's not just about the geographic, it's about the depth. So what used to be the province of the nation state is now in everybody's hands. It's there for all to see. It's there for all to reach. It's just the democratization of knowledge is everybody's plaything, but, and the but is this one. That information has to be reliable. We're coming to the conclusion of American elections. We've had the whole fake news. What do we believe? I go back in time. Two of my favorite authors, Asimov and Carl Sagan. All of the books in the world contain no more information than is available on a video image, a video set from a single American city. That was 2011. Yeah, think about it now. Back to my 2.5 times 10 to the 18, that was 2013. We're now at zettabytes, 44 of them. All of that is out there. How much of it is real? How much of it is knowledge? And how much of it is just data? And I think the understanding, and this really plays back to the agenda that many of you will have, how much of that is reliable, how much of it can be used in the right context. I'll skip that. To me, it's all about the flow of data from its construct, its collection, all the way through to its use. So how do we know that the data that we collected, whether it's by a keyboard or a sensor, is properly represented at its point of use? And, Brian Hanrahan, when I was at the Royal College, gave a great lecture. And he spent the first 15 minutes mingling with people from across 43 nation states. And then he started his lecture about the information age by showing a video of world events. And it was all taken from his mobile phone, looking at people who were in the coffee room and portraying them in a different environment, portraying our Chinese representative as the Chinese spokesperson for Star Wars, and portraying our US colleague as the US representative of the debate on Star Wars, two sides of an equation which were never actually discussed in that room. But with one mobile phone, access to the internet, everybody without journalistic qualifications is a media representative. So I'm going to finish, if I may, with, as one would expect, coming from the National Physical Laboratory, a little bit about confidence and the requirements of measurement to provide the underpin as we go forward for confidence in what we do. If we get measurement wrong, we're going to get our confidence wrong. We're going to be taken down false paths. We're going to be given, quotes, fake news. We're going to have information that leads us to the wrong decisions, as we can see here. This is not a new construct. It goes back over 6,000 years. So, here's some history, here's some things to show your children. But, I took my daughter to MPL and she said, how long have we been doing measurement? And I said, well, over 6,000 years. And she said, really, show me. So we showed her the weights. This is the heritage, but it's not new to the UK. If you go forward in history by around about, 5,000 years, you get to the Magna Carta. And here we started to say, actually, if we're going to underpin trade, as it then was, and arguably trade is a first measure in confidence. Trade is nothing more than confidence in what you're buying. When you buy a stock and share, you're not buying the gold weight value of that stock and share. You're buying confidence in the operation of that organization. The Magna Carta, 900 years ago nearly, I wasn't there, nearly 900 years ago, focused on standard measures. Okay, maybe my favorite is wine and ale, not corn, but standard measures for that as a backbone to the trade infrastructure. Fast forward to just over 100 years ago, and we get to the launch of the National Physical Laboratory on the back of an international convention on measurement, really realizing that measurement actually underpinned everything we did. The Prince of Wales, as was, hurrah, Prince of Wales, the object of the scheme bring scientific knowledge on our everyday industrial and commercial life. Today we talk about economic and societal well-being, but really to break down the barrier between theory and practice. So what can we do scientifically that impacts on the day-to-day life of the society, of the economy, through a measurement metric? We in MPL, I'm simplistic. I said I'm Welsh. I like to distill into threes. My take, I think, given my 5 R's from the previous, is to break down the digital world into 3 components that lead to a fourth. And I offer these not as an answer, but as something to think about. Information comes from somewhere, doesn't it? We have to collect the information at the outset. That might be fingers on a keyboard, it might be a sensor, it might be any form of way of information gathering, but somewhere we collect that information. I alluded earlier to the 30 billion interconnected devices. We talk about 5G, Japan talks about 9G. In every aspect of life now, we are not looking at a single source of information. We're looking at multiple sources of information connected together. So bringing those parts of the jigsaw, those pieces of the puzzle into perspective, bringing them together to the point of need, which is really about comprehending what that data is telling us. So there's no point in collecting information, connecting it together if it doesn't inform a value add decision. So the third bit, collect the information, connect it together, bring it to comprehension through analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, human augmented, or even back to basic, just human, means that we improve, we maximize our confidence in the decisions that we're making. So for me, in a simple overall strategy on a slide, that's our narrative, is that in this digital world, it's all about collecting information. It's all about connecting it together. It's all about comprehending, understanding that information in a way that gives us confidence in those key value decisions. We've got a long and proud heritage, I think, in the UK. These are just 4 graphics, really from MPL's heritage, but we've got a long and proud heritage in the whole digital domain. You know, we invented radar, top left. Alan Turing worked at the National Physical Laboratory. I'm very proud to follow in his footsteps. Invented the ACE, the Automated Computation Engine, all the way through to the world's first atomic clock. I talked about our reliance on timing. You know, all of those are built on technology for the, developed from the UK. The question in my mind is that's all history. We're now in the digital age. So what do I tell my successors? What will my successor be saying that we in the UK took forward in this digital age, in this digital revolution? How was the UK at the forefront? How did the UK change the tides of the global story? So that's kind of all I've got for you. It's built around the 5 R's. It's focused on the 3 C's, collect, connect, comprehend, leading to confidence, my 4th C. But to me, that's the sum of the digital age. I'll take any questions. If you need a break, just shout. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. We've got a couple of questions coming. First one is, how do you gain the confidence you seek when reliance, resilience, rapidity, and reach is exploited in the way we have seen in the US election? Could this happen in the UK?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it comes to my 5th R of reliability. So, how does one understand the traceability, if you like, of that information. And I think, I don't know who asked the question and what your background is, sir or mom. I think there's two different components to this. One is the industrial stroke economic, and one is the societal. And I do think the two are different. So if we're looking at information as it flows in industry, maybe we're a bit more rigorous, and we look a bit more about the evidence base, about how that information flows into our design or our manufacture or wherever it might be. And I dare to suggest, and I'm willing to take flamethrowers on this one, but I am willing to suggest that in society, we have lowered that barrier. And I'm minded, and I'm not sure this is a digression. I think it's relevant, and certainly to this audience. A former US president once said, "He who sacrifices liberty for temporary security deserves neither." And I think we've kind of traded in the societal domain, our liberty or our freedom for, if you like, easiness. And maybe that's a Welsh word, I don't know. But, you know, we are quite happy to put all of our information on a Tesco club card for it to tell us what we can buy cheaper. We're quite happy to put all of our information on social media so that it can tell us how to think about our lives. And I'm kind of taking that to an extreme. But I think there is a differentiation between the economic and the and the societal side. And I guess my watchword there is it's only going to get worse, or let me rephrase that. It's only going to get more difficult as we move to a world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, where the algorithms are defining what you should see. So it's not filtered by somebody who is thinking, is this relevant? It's just auto-generated. And I think there's a real challenge. Can I share with that esteemed gentleman or lady who posed the question? We've been looking at a construct for skills and a national accreditation of skills across the UK in data science. So my analogy is you wouldn't get an architect to design your house if they weren't qualified. You wouldn't expect a surgeon to operate on you if they didn't have the right qualification. But a data scientist does not need a nationally accredited qualification to perform the art of data science. Why not? And what was interesting, and so I share this back to the point of the question, was the biggest thing that came up in this was ethics. It wasn't how do you do data, how do you process data, you know, all of that sort of, for me, the math side of it. It was the human side, it was the ethics side. Which bit is relevant? How do you decide the relevance? How do you decide the attribution? How do you trace it back to source? It was all about the ethics side. And I think as we move forward, and maybe this is a plea from me to you, is that we often think about the data side as the hard science. And I talked about the wet science in biochemistry for COVID-19. We often think about data science as the hard science, it's bits and bytes, it's computation, and it's hard mathematics. No, it's not anymore. I was asked by the Home Secretary, please don't attribute this, if you're recording, turn it off, on Arab Spring, can we intercept every Twitter feed that's going on? And the answer was yes. At 2,500, as it was at the time, tweets per second, we can read every one. Can we understand them? No. You know, what do they actually mean? Can we decipher the news breaking or the ground opinion forming? No, because that's not about hard numbers. And then the third question was, can we influence them? And that's a bigger question, which is that the role of a nation state? And all of those things come to me back to the science. The hard science is easy. The ethics is complicated.
I'm going to roll the next two questions together, but how can AI be held accountable? And how do we deal with trust and verified going forward in respect of machine-derived decision making?
Yeah, those are two great questions, and they do come naturally together. And I don't have a simple answer. If I did, perhaps I'd be in a different job. To me, there's two aspects to this. One is trusted, and the second is transparent. And the two are different but interlinked. So, you know, I gave you my example of early work with AI stroke ML. We failed on both of those. We failed on trusted, we failed on transparent. Trusted, I think, is tackleable even in today's age, in that you can put in place, and I skipped, or I didn't put in slides on this. Effectively, the current buzz phrase I hate is digital twins. And many of you perhaps will love that or live and die by it. I don't know, but apologize. I don't like it, but digital twin, we'll build an emulation of whatever you're going to do, and then we'll test it up at the edges, we'll test it at the extremes, and we can do that with AI ML. And you can do your input and your output, and you can run it through a whole bunch of scenarios and see if it tells you what you think it should do. And that bit I think we can get a grip of. The bit I think is complex is transparent, because I can guarantee you, and we saw this with an airline that I won't name, but you can all name them yourselves, when they had difficulties with their in-flight systems, but they would not make transparent the AI and ML algorithms that were underpinning their pilot assistance software, because that was proprietary. It was commercially sensitive. It wouldn't be opened up. And you know, those of you who drive a Mercedes-Benz, if you ever open the lid, as I used to 30 years ago, to change the spark plugs or whatever, it's a black box, and it's all computationally driven. And despite my asking, Mercedes-Benz would not open up their black box to me to see how it worked. Yeah. And I think the economic drivers of that AI ML architecture mean that transparent is going to be very difficult, whereas trusted may be easier. The challenge I leave the gentleman or lady who asked that question is, can you have one without the other? In other words, my challenge, I think, is, can you be trusted for the data you put in and the outputs that you get? But if you're not transparent, do you actually understand the edge conditions?
A number of other questions coming. I just want to ask one quickly, which is, you talked about confidence and resilience. Is there something that we as information security professionals should be trying to tackle over the next 10 years? Are there some issues that are not yet solved that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, Kevin, if that's your question, of course I would say it's a great question. Yeah, if I may, I'd go back to the narrative I had. You'll notice I didn't actually talk to the slides. I don't normally work with slides. For me, there's three things that impact on our confidence in operation. One is natural, the second is deliberate, and the third is accidental. The natural, I think we can get some sort of understanding of. You may have noticed in the National Security or the National Risk Register, as it was, and the National Risk Assessment in 2010, we put space weather in for the first time. And that was in advance of the Olympics in 2012. So it went back to the Carrington event, 1852. I know I wrote it. And a worry that should such an event happen, the next predicted highlight or high spot was summer 2012. And if that happened, it would wipe out all of the communications for the Olympics and have bigger implications that we didn't really talk about. I think we can model that bit. This community, I think, comes in very much in the second tier, which I subdivide, and you may, and I really welcome views, may disagree, but the deliberate cyber external versus the insider threat. And I think maybe I reflect back on my previous point about ethics. Cyber is probably hard physical keyboard type software algorithms stuff that's all in the digital domain. Insider threat to me is more about the psychological, what would make someone do the, I nearly said the name of the retailer, what would make somebody want to undermine their former employer, and put in place code that disrupts the online activity. And we struggled a lot with this around aviation security back in 2010 when we were putting the cyber strategy together with James Quinault. That's a different paradigm, and I think this community, and I'll open myself up to abuse here, possibly is too dominated by the people who do the former, which is the hard physical software. It's numbers, it's crunching, it's maths, it's computational, and it and possibly has too few of the psychological, social influences in the society. And I think that's changing, but I think it's changing too slowly. And then the third is the accidental. And I think as a community that, this audience could have an influence here. So by accidental, I mean, you take your driverless car, I'll go to extremes, and you get on the ferry and you go to France and you drive on the wrong side of the road. Or, if you want to be different, you might go to Spain and still drive on the wrong side of the road. So, that's the accidental. We didn't think about the international dimension. And I think things like the skills agenda that I alluded to earlier, organizations like this could contribute to a national skills imperative. That means that accidental doesn't become zero, but it diminishes to the lowest possible level, by professional skills, by professional training.
Yeah. Comes back to the people.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I hold the head of digital title, and I think I spend more than half of my life thinking about people.
Yeah.
And I do thinking about computers.
Yeah. So just conscious of time, I could say thank you very much for that, Neil. We could have a discussion about the ethics around AI and ML, and there's so many avenues we could go from here, but thank you for that introduction to this whole domain. And I know we're going to be following up with 2 more webinars in December and January, looking at some more areas in a bit more depth. So thank you, Neil. Thank you for joining us today.
Kevin, thank you.
Fantastic presentation.
Thank you. I've left my details on screen. If anyone does want to be in touch offline, please do so.
Great, thank you.
Otherwise, great privilege to be here and talking to you. Thank you ever so much for listening.
Great. And Shona and CIISec team, I think you've just got a couple of slides to wrap with.
Yep, thank you guys. Thank you, Neil. That was fascinating presentation, really interesting. I'm sure we could listen to you for another hour, and there's some few more questions actually that have been submitted. So what we'll do, if that's okay, is we'll send those to you and then perhaps just get an answer from you, and then we can distribute those out, because there's some really great questions about AI and 9G that you mentioned as well, I think has interested people.
Sure. Yeah, Shona, if anyone with a question wants to attribute that question, I'd be happy to follow up directly, as well as through the Chartered Institute.
We'll forward those on. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
if they don't want to and it wants to be anonymous, I'll just reply through the Institute.
Yeah,
thanks.
Great. Well, as I say, thank you very much for your time today and all that effort that you've put in. It's been brilliant. And Kevin, thank you as well for being a wonderful host. It just leaves us to say before we sign off, we do have more events. We've got some more of these NPL webinars coming up. So do take a look on the website, CIISec.org, and also on our LinkedIn page as well. We've got the events listed there and you can just sign up via those. So we've got Thursday, 26th of November, we've got a webinar in our series of innovation webinars, so all about innovation and technology. That one's coming up, data insurance and risk quantification. 8th of December is the next NPL webinar, and then we've got our masterclass on the 9th of December. And as you can see, 15th December is our ADP event for members, and then the next in the series of NPL webinars on the 19th of January. So take a look at the website, sign up for all these events, and take a look on LinkedIn as well. And just thank you again, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.